And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook for Tuesday and Wednesday. It is Memorial Day, May 27th, and starting out with the sea ice. We have seen a fair amount of melting now across the northern portion of the Bering Sea, with the shore-fast ice beginning to give way there along the Yukon Delta more considerably here over the past week or so. And we'll just continue to see these areas slowly opening up as we head into June. Just a slow melt-off because overall temperatures have averaged below normal along the west side of the state pretty much all winter into the springtime. But we are watching a few different weather systems. There is a pocket of colder air aloft. This kind of cold core low is going to work its way westward into eastern Russia. Meanwhile, we have a low southwest of the Panhandle and Haida Gwaii. Not a strong system, but it'll keep some showery weather going across parts of the Panhandle, especially southern areas on Tuesday. And then this low, not especially deep, but it does have a occluded front arcing ahead of it that'll bring a little breezier conditions and some rain or rain showers. And that low on Tuesday afternoon will begin to just kind of expand the front eastward with maybe a little secondary development by Wednesday. The low off of the Panhandle weakening, but just kind of keeping the possibility of some scattered showers going on there, especially the southern two-thirds of the Panhandle. Area of disturbed weather, kind of an easterly wave working its way westward across the Copper River Basin, Wrangell, St. Elias Mountains. We'll have area lower cloudiness and periods of rain there continuing into Tuesday, and then that system that crossed the Bering Strait will be pushed further westward into Russia. And looking at Wednesday afternoon, then we have still that low weakening out over the eastern Aleutians, the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, with the front arcing ahead of it with a weak secondary low taking shape just to the south-southeast of Kodiak Island, but otherwise no really strong systems. The next system of consequence will be still way to the west and southwest of the farthest part there of the Aleutians. And looking at the winds for Tuesday, variable, 5 knots, foot or two waves there, Lynn Canal. Look for southeast winds 10 knots here within Stevens Passage, waves again a foot or two. Upwards of 20 knots southeast winds with 3-4 foot waves, Dixon Entrance. And we have southeast or east winds 10 to 15 knots from off of Craig to off of Gustavus, with just variable winds around 5 knots outside of Yakutat Bay and Cape Suckling. For Wednesday, variable winds 5 knots, waves a foot or two within Lynn Canal. South winds around 10 knots with 2-foot waves from Stevens Passage down through Dixon Entrance, and then kind of a mix of westerly southwest or west-northwest winds 15 knots south of Gustavus along the outer nearshore coast, with swells of maybe just 3-4 feet. And then winds a little more southeasterly there at Cape Suckling 10 knots with waves of 3 to 4 feet. For Tuesday, we are looking for southwest winds around 10 knots, Prince William Sound, Upper Cook Inlet waves just a couple of feet. Strongest winds will be at the entrance of Cook Inlet, southeasterly 20 knots with swells 4 to 5 feet. And on Wednesday, variable winds around 10 knots, Upper Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, and outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, waves just running there a couple of feet. Still, the strongest winds Wednesday will be at and just outside of the entrance of Cook Inlet, 25 to 30 knot easterly winds with swells of 6 to 7 feet. For Tuesday, Kodiak Island will see variable winds to 15 knot Shelikof Strait, otherwise southeasterly winds extending down along the Alaska Peninsula at 20 to 25 knots, swells 4 to 5 feet on the North Pacific side and generally right around 3 feet on the Bering side. For Wednesday, look for east-southeast winds 20 to 25 knots around Kodiak Island. And then as we trail off down along at least the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, winds will be easterly 15 knots, becoming variable at 10 knots, especially off of Perryville and Sand Point, southwestward with waves only 3 to 4 feet. Look for southeast winds on the Bering side at 15 to 20 knots, and again, wave swells there about 3 feet. The Aleutians, eastern Aleutians, are looking at west to southwest winds 15 to 20 knots. As we get out toward the western Aleutians, west of Adak, winds will turn more northerly at 15 knots there out toward Kiska, swell 6 to 7 feet. Here we have that weak low circulation on Wednesday just north of the eastern Aleutians with southwest to west flow there at 15 knots. And as we get further west, variable winds around 10 knots west of Adak, but easterly winds picking up out ahead of that next system that'll be still way west and southwest of the westernmost Aleutians. We expect easterly winds there on Wednesday at 25 knots, swells 4 to 6 feet. Along the southwest coast, southeast winds there within Bristol Bay, 25 knots with 4-foot waves. East winds to 20 knots within Kuskokwim Bay and waves running a couple of feet. Otherwise, St. Matthew, St. Paul, the Pribilovs, northeast winds to 20 knots, swells 4 to 5 feet. And we have winds from Norton Sound down along the lower Yukon Delta coast, 15 to 20 knots with waves of 3 to 4 feet. For Wednesday, look for winds to be southeasterly to 25 knots with 4 to 5 foot swells within Bristol Bay. Easterly winds 20 knots within Kuskokwim Bay, 4-foot waves. Northeast winds 15 to 20 knots, St. Matthew down through St. Paul and St. George. Swells of 4 to 5 feet, and then generally an easterly flow either out of Norton Sound or off of the lower Yukon Delta coast at 10 to 15 knots with waves of 2 to 3 feet. As we pass up through the Bering Strait, we're looking at south-southwest winds on the north side of St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait, just about 10 knots. Still some ice in place through the lower Chukchi Sea, kind of a mixed bag of winds 5 to 10 knots. And then as we get up along from around Wainwright to along the Arctic coast, generally easterly winds around 10 knots with still a fair amount of ice in place up there. And then on Wednesday, winds along the Arctic coast from Utqiagvik to Kaktovik will be generally northwest to west 5 to 10 knots. But as we drop down through the Chukchi Sea along the northwest coast, winds will be out of the northeast to north 10 to 15 knots. And as we pass down southward through the Bering Strait, we expect winds to be out of the northeast to north on the 20 knots on the north side of St. Lawrence Island to along the west coast of the Seward Peninsula from Wales down to Nome.